Running a business is hard enough, let alone having to do all the admin behind your business. And one of the biggest admins and headaches from my point of view, and for many of our students and sellers, is taxes and what we're going to do, how to submit it, what needs to be done, and how to do it correctly. And all these questions that keep coming up. And every time there's a tax deadline, it comes up again and again. So what I wanted to do is to bring in an absolute expert in this regard and pick his brain endlessly in this recorded format and then give it to you guys so that you have the answers to these questions, which come up time and time again, because we have to do our tax correctly. Otherwise, we could get into big trouble, right? So let's find out what we've got to do, how to do it, and exactly what needs to be done. Now, there's nobody better for me to have this discussion with than Rodney Kearns. Now, we do have the same surname, and if we look familiar, it's because we are father and son. I am not the father, so as you may have guessed. And I'm really glad to have this conversation because my dad helps me with a lot of tax stuff, and he's an absolute wizard. He's been doing this for many years, and I really love his. I really appreciate him kind of coming here and talking to you guys. So, Rod, father, dad, maybe you could give a bit of a background quickly before we dive into your tax experiences.
Good afternoon. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been doing tax for specifically for the last 20 years. Basically, it's individuals tax and it is company tax. And many people that have tax problems with SARS receive a revenue. They'll approach me and ask me please to try and assist them in resolving those particular issues, whether it's late submissions, penalties that have come along. SARS has raised penalties for things that they feel that they're not obliged to pay for. And we obviously have to look at the facts. And if I see that it's reasonable and that there's a chance that we can get these penalties reversed, then I'll assist them along that avenue. And generally, we tend to get it resolved. So that's my expertise really, is dealing with company tax and individual tax, dealing with the provisional tax. And involved in all of those, we also then have things like dividends tax. And I may have mentioned provisional tax on an annual basis, but that's where I really aim and deal with on a daily basis.
Geez, and that all those things kind of give me a little bit of anxiety because there's so much to know about it. And thank goodness we're doing this session. So this session is one of two parts. So we're going to do this conversation focused on sole traders, people who are starting a business. Maybe it's a side hustle, maybe it's just the sole prop, and what to do there from a tax point of view. And there'll be a separate interview talking about tax concerns and what to do if you are running a business, a PTY limited company, from that perspective. So that'll be the part two. But for this one, Dad, like a lot of people want to get started with starting an e-commerce business or starting business in general, and they don't necessarily want to jump through the hoops of registering a PTY limited. And the first question that comes up is like, is it okay? Is it legal to start a business in your personal capacity?
Yes, it absolutely is. So just let's start from the basics. When you finish as a student, be it at school, college, or varsity, you don't start out with a tax number. So the very basis of this is to get that tax number. Now, if you go into employment, the onus is on the employer to actually apply for your tax number with all the relevant information that's required, and SARS will then issue with a tax number. But if you as an individual start off and you want to become a sole trader off the bat, you then need to approach SARS and get that tax number. And that really is reasonably simple to do. As a matter of just walking into SARS, having your ID book there because you're already registered at Home Affairs. And literally at your SARS office, I generally use the Randburg office, just depending on obviously where you're situated. But I've seen there, whilst people are waiting in the queue to be attended, somebody will be walking up and down saying, does anybody need a tax number? And raise their hand, they select you out the queue, take you into the back office, and within 5 minutes, you're issued with a tax number. So that takes a huge amount of pain off the fact of just saying, I don't have a tax number, I don't know how to get it. It's really that simple in getting it. They go out of their way to make sure they get you one, if, as I say, you haven't been employed previously, because once you're issued the tax number, that you have that tax number for life. It doesn't depend on where you are in the country. As long as you're in South Africa and you're a South African taxpayer, that tax number is with you for life. Okay, so that's where you are there. So now let's say that you are already employed and you suddenly see something where you can make some extra money, and you're earning a salary. You're going to get issued with an RP5 at the end of the tax year, and that basically has your income that you've got on it. If you with them with a medical aid or a pension fund or a provident fund, anything like that, that all goes on the RP5. But now you're saying, right, I've got this idea that I could make money elsewhere, and you just start quietly, as Warwick said, a side hustle, that's fine. In your actual tax return, which is pre-populated with everything on your RP5, there are questions that ask, do you earn any other income? And there's a box that you can tick. It'll then say how many different ones. So in other words, if you've just got a side hustle, it allows you actually to have up to 10 side hustles. But then, of course, that just makes it more and more complicated, because within that tax return, you've got to have almost like another, well, you've got to account for that income and those expenses in it. So if it says, are you earning any other income in any other way? You tick it, says yes. It will automatically pre-populate in the return a section which says, what do you call yourself? And then it's like a little income statement where it says, okay, give me your income, give me your expenses, and then is there a profit or a loss? Let's hope it's a profit. Now that profit will get added to the income that you're making whilst you're being employed. In other words, per whatever's on your RP5 and whatever your, and when I call it a tax rate, depending on what you earn, it falls into different categories or different percentages. So for example, anything up to, let's say, 237,000 Rand is taxed at 18%. And then it's on a sliding scale going right up to 1.8 million Rand, where you're taxed at 45%. Obviously, over and above that, you're not taxed the 45% on every Rand you earn from 1 to 1.8. So on a sliding scale going up, but obviously we're not looking at that income right now whilst you're doing your little side hustle. And but if you're earning that money and you're making a profit in a side hustle and you don't pay what I'm going to call provisional tax, and that's something else we're going to have to deal with now, because literally what's happened is your employer is taxing you correctly. It's basically, they are taxing you correctly because that's the way they're based up with SARS. SARS has given them the tables, whatever you input for your income, less medical aid, less provident fund, those sorts of things. Basically, that tax is equalized at the end of the tax year. That's the way they're trying to work it. So people aren't owed money, or SARS doesn't owe them a refund. But now the minute you have a side hustle thrown into it, you're now earning money. So let's say you're earning at the lowest rate of 18%. Whatever that profit is there'll be 18% due to SARS at the end of the tax year, which you may not have taken into account. And that's why SARS bring in what they call a provisional tax. So on any side hustle, you are now registered for tax. And on e-filing, I'm stating you are familiar with e-filing and you are doing your own tax. If not, you've got someone like me who's a tax practitioner that does it for you. But it's also that easy on e-filing just to apply for provisional tax, because you've already got a tax number. It's exactly the same tax number. You say that you want to be a professional taxpayer, ticket, and then twice a year, you have to do a submission. So in whatever tax year you are being taxed in, current or in years going forward, and every August, by the 31st of August, and it's also, I'm just mentioning this because basically the way SARS still works, which I think is crazy, because in this electronic system we're in at the moment, I mean, bank payments go through immediately. But literally what's happening is, and SARS has bank accounts with every single bank. So what they're saying is that if at the end of any month, you've got to pay it on the Friday of the month. So in other words, if the end of the month is a Sunday and you pay it on the Saturday or the Sunday, there's a 10% penalty on whatever amount is due. So let's say provisional tax, you say, having worked it all out, I owe SARS 10,000 Rand. If it's not paid on Friday of that month end, being August or February, which is your second provisional tax, they hit you with a 10% penalty, which is annoying, but you don't want to fall into that trap. Okay, so if you're going to have a side hustle, you need to also register as a provisional taxpayer and make sure that you submit that tax return by the end of August. You can submit it much earlier. You can submit it at the beginning of August. You can submit it in July, because it's an anticipation of what you think your taxable income for the year will be for that year. So if all you are is on a side hustle, you won't know exactly what you're going to earn, because you're not quite sure what's coming in August. So you've worked it out from March to July, and you say, well, I think I'll earn X amount in August. So on that, you base it. And what SARS is saying, they want to know how much you think you're going to earn for the whole year. So let's say you think it's going to be 120,000 for the year. You've got to actually put on, and it's a guesstimate. They're not going to hit you on that 120,000. So in other words, if you only make 100,000 at the end of the year, that's not a problem. If you make 150,000 at the end of the year, it doesn't matter. But you've just got to give them an estimation in August of what you think you're going to earn for the 12 months. And then the tax is automatically worked out, and you only pay 50% of it in August. And then when you get to February, if it's more or less than that, you pay the balance. The other 50%, which you would pay if you've estimated correctly, but invariably you're not going to be 100% on, because anything could happen. You could have a bonanza over December or January, or things might go pear-shaped, and in actual fact you might land up closing the business, a side hustle, between September and February, in which case SARS will then owe you a refund because you overpaid it, if you know what I'm trying to say. So by the time you do that submission in February, that it sorts itself out. However, if when you get to the end of February, because at that stage you've got a good idea of what you've earned, SARS allow you to estimate it at 90%. So when you actually do your submission, which can only be done in the following July, because that's when they open up the tax submission, the actual submissions for the previous year. If you haven't paid enough, in other words, 90% of what they think it'd be, they can then hit you with a 10% penalty on the difference between what you said it would be and what you paid it on and what it actually is. Okay, but it's more complicated. It's not that difficult, but just you've got to bear in mind that SARS can be very, very pedantic when it comes to submitting on time and also making sure that you've paid within a reasonable amount on time.
The estimate.
Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does. And that amount that you're paying is not the full income that you're earning, it's the profit. It's I suppose it's not 18% of your profit. It depends on how much you're being taxed in your personal capacity from PAYE. Then that's a slightly.
Okay, so it's 18, yeah, so it's 18% if it's just your side hustle. If the side hustle is added on to what you're earning for PAYE, then you've got to work out what bracket you're in at that stage there. Make sure. But also, if you're doing the provisional tax return, you've literally got to you're not just putting in there what you add on your side hustle. That provisional tax return has got to be what you think you're going to be earning in total for the year. So it's what your PAYE is, which you know because you know what you're earning on a monthly basis, and you then deduct the tax that the PAYE that has been deducted already. So they're not trying to nail you for more than what it is. And once you register for PAYE, they actually then know, literally. They pre-populate because they've almost estimated what your from previous years, what your income is and what your PAYE is. They're just assuming that you're still with the same company. Things could change. You could have been retrenched or something like that, but they'll pre-populate it. So if the PAYE they're putting is too much, you can reduce it. Just don't assume it's correct. But generally what's happening is they know what your income is approximately from the previous year, and what you're doing is you're adding the side hustle to it. And that side hustle, you've got to know what bracket you fall in there to make sure that tax gets taxed correctly. Yes.
Okay. And just for clarity, or just a question that might come up for people is like, if you're a student, go and get your tax number and then you can use that. If you're employed, the company gives you a tax number, or you have a tax number, then on your IRP5, you're going to do this in addition. What if you have been retrenched, or if you are just in between roles and now you want to start your business? And you're doing it as a sole trader and you just do without registering a PTY limited. Do you just follow the same process? You go on e-filing and submit your tax returns the same way?
Exactly the same way. So if you've been retrenched, depending when it is during the year, you may have an RP5 for part of the year, and then you start your own business. It's got the same tax number. And when you populate that tax return, again, you just are stating, I do have another business, and you fill in the information that's required. And that RP5 from your retrenchment, if it's in the current tax year, will automatically appear when you want to do the tax submission for that particular year. But then it's your side hustle or as a sole trader that you then fill that information in. And as a sole trader, what I really suggest you do is open up a second bank account. So in other words, whatever your name is, and say trading as, because as trading as, you don't need to have a PDY limited. And at the bank, you just ask them to open up a second bank account for you, and then just make sure that as much as possible, and as best everything, goes through that second bank account that relates or pertains to your side business, or which might not be your business or your sole trading business. Because if SARS do question or audit that particular part of the return, and they do tend to, unfortunately, if you're a sole trader or do have another little business, they do tend to want to audit that section more than not, because basically you're the one that's got all the records. So they need to know, and we're going to be dealing with record keeping just now, but so it's very important to make sure that all those invoices are kept aside and you've got a good spreadsheet of all the expenses. Not only have the spreadsheet, that's what you can first submit to SARS if they question it, but invariably they might want the invoices that relate to those expenses. And you need to have them. And also, if you're going to do that, I suggest you get a credit card or a debit card or something in the name of your sole trader business that has your name on it. It's no good if you're going to go for coffee because you can claim certain expenses, like if you're going to see a client and you're taking them for breakfast or coffee or something like that. But those little till slips are really no good because they just disappear after a while. But if you've paid for it on a card, which has got this trading as name on it and that type of thing, there you've got a bank statement, which is perfect. That then almost doubles up as your bookkeeping because you've got the income coming in, you've got the expenses going off, and that there literally gives you your trading for a monthly period, which as a sole trader and a small business, it works out perfectly for you.
Okay, so just on the trading as name, can you just guess anything? Like if I wanted to start a little side hustle, can I register a bank account and say Warwick Kearns trading as Warwick's online store? The trading as, can I just claim anything? I suppose, like, are there any rules around that? Do I need to register with CRPC or can I just claim it?
No, you don't have to register with CRPC. CRPC has absolutely nothing to do with the sole trader at all. When we get into a PDY company, that's where you've got to worry about CRPC. And also if you want to reserve the name and that type of thing, those are the things you've got to worry about. But when it comes to your own personal situation, you're not registering it at all, there's no trademark there unless you want to go ahead and try and get a trademark for it. But basically you're just wanting to be a sole trader. And some people do it within their personal account. That's messy because as an individual, we all have expenses. For example, if you've got a property, you're going to have insurances and rates and taxes and municipal bills and those sorts of things. You need to try and keep that separate. So, I mean, you might be working from home, so to speak, and trying to include some of those expenses. But that's something different because you need to show that you're keeping your personal life totally separate from the sole trader business. And if you're going to then have percentage expenses coming across, that you can do because you can say, look, I think I'm going to deal with work from home, but in that it's a percentage that goes across, and then you can prove that your municipal bill is X amount, and I'm claiming like 10% of the municipal bill for this particular room that I'm using as a study and that type of thing, and that's the way you can substantiate it. Because people make the mistake of thinking, well, I work from home, and therefore my entire municipal bill and all the other expenses can all let the company pay for it. The company, I'm saying the sole trader, pay for it. You're not going to get away with it. Okay. And what happens then, SARS reverses the whole thing, and it becomes very messy and time consuming to try and substantiate.
All right. So, often I tell people to try and just move as quickly as possible. My advice is try and figure out if the products that you're selling are going to sell first and kind of worry about the admin later. And setting up bank accounts for me is a bit of admin. So would it be okay if somebody starts their business and we start receiving a few customer payments into our personal bank account, we keep a spreadsheet, and then after say 2 months, we then, okay, cool, now we know this is working. Let's register that the separate bank account trading as, and then we start receiving the payments there, provided we've got a spreadsheet record of everything so far.
Yes, no, that does work. And specifically if you're just starting off and you've come out of employment during a tax year, let's just say what makes it a lot easier, but doesn't always work that way. Let's say you've worked for an employer up to about July or August of the year, and now you're trying to get yourself organized. You've left that employer completely, and now you're trying to get your business running. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Try and get your admin and all those sorts of things sorted out over the next 6 months and make sure that you're ready to be operating, if you're happy with the way it's going, from the 1st of March, because that then gives you March until February of the following. That's what a tax year is made up of. It's made from the 1st of March of one particular year to the 28th or 29th of February of the next particular year. And then whilst you're getting yourself ready in the previous year, yes, that's right, because you're not quite sure if it's going to take off or not. I mean, it could be a huge failure. So, and it could cost you a lot of money and you're going nowhere with it. But the idea is let's get this thing up and running. And so, yeah, so when you're starting, you're going to have to send some expense coming through your personal account. And you don't really have to worry about it in the year in which you've still got an RP5 because you've still got income coming into your account. It's a different story if you, well, I'm saying this is a different story. If you end employment on the 28th of February of one particular year and you plan to start from the 1st of March, because you haven't given yourself that time, and then 12 months is a long time not to sort of have any income or have it properly recorded, if you know what I'm trying to say. I think, well, I'll leave it for 12 months. So I'd say a reasonable time is 6 months to try and get yourself going. Other than that, I wouldn't leave it for much longer than that.
Perfect. Thanks. That's awesome. So you're mentioning that the tax year starts 1st of March, ends end of February the following year. Now, these tax dates, like, thank goodness I have a father who does this stuff, who reminds me of when the tax is due and when we got to do what and all this stuff. But for anybody else who isn't as fortunate as me, like, can you give us the exact timelines? You've already mentioned the August provisional tax submission and then the end of February submission. Like, if somebody were to write down these dates so that they could put it in their calendar and year on year, they knew what dates they need to be paying attention to, like, what are those important tax dates?
Okay, so as a sole trader, I'm assuming as a sole trader, a side hustle, you're not employing anybody, because that then has its own issues. Because if you do employ somebody, then you should be paying PAYE. But PAYE is very difficult to pay if as a sole trader, because you wouldn't have registered for PAYE, because invariably what they want, you can and should, under those circumstances, register for PAYE. So when you get into a company situation, generally companies, you've got to worry about whether you're going to hit the limit and have to do VAT. And if you're employing people, automatically you have to be registered for PAYE. But as a sole trader, if you're employing people, then you also have to register for PAYE. And when I'm saying, because now don't forget that PAYE is going to also be under your personal tax number, which makes things messy. So let's assume you're not going to be involved in PAYE for now. Okay, and we try and deal with that later, because PAYE has to be paid by the 7th of every month, or the Friday closest to the 7th of every month. So if it's a Sunday, it's going to be the 5th, etc., etc. Okay. So the most important dates as a sole trader, as an individual, is that if you're a sole trader, you need to register for provisional tax. If you're registering for provisional tax, you have to do 2 provisional payments, and the one is by the end of August. Again, I'm not giving you an exact date. It should be the 31st of August, closest Friday to it, the 28th of February, or the closest Friday to it, the first provisional and the second provisional. And then as far as the tax returns are concerned, dependent obviously on the tax year you're in, and the current tax year, so tax year's just passed. SARS will only opens their tax submission period from July. And it's not generally the 1st of July. It can be the end of the first week of July, the end of the second week of July, maybe even the end of the third week of July. But the most important thing is they tend to cut off now on about the 23rd of October. So there's not a very big window to actually do your tax submission. It would be as a sole trader, as an individual or a sole trader, your tax return has got to be in by, let's call it the mid-October, because you don't want to leave it to the last minute. So when you're talking about specific dates, it's tax return for the past period, which is the past 12 months, ending on the 28th of February of that year, and also the provisional tax returns, which also would have been submitted in that past year. And then going forward again, it will be for the following tax year, it'll be August, February, and then that tax return. So there's not a lot you have to do as far as returns are concerned as a sole trader, just making sure you've done your 2 provisional tax returns and your own tax submission for that tax year.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that. And tell me, can people do this? Like, you've got so many clients who pay you to do this. You do this for them and their businesses, their personal capacity. And it's kind of complicated, but can somebody do this on their own, or do they need to hire a tax practitioner like yourself?
They can do it on their own. People, as Warwick has mentioned, employ me because I remind them all the time what to do. I remind people that it's provisional. The provisional tax returns are due. Make sure that they've got all the right information in place, because if it's the first time I'm doing it, I've been doing it over the years. Obviously, if I've done it for many, many years for that particular person, I know exactly what they've earned. I've just got to say what's different. In other words, have you taken out another retirement annuity? And in some instances, which you've also got to remember, even as a sole trader, you may have an investment which earns you interest. That interest has also got to be taken into account, because not all interest is tax-free. It's up to a certain limit. And if you've got a rental property, that also complicates matters somewhat. And actually, another question that comes up on that tax return is, do you rent out? Do you receive rental income? Again, it'll open another block, and it wants to know all about that property. Well, not all about it, but it wants to sort of have an address of it. Also so as a sole trader doing your side hustle, the minute you enter that, SARS then gives you a unique identification number for it, which you can then use every year thereafter for that sole trader. Same with the rental property. You get issued with a unique number. And so they actually are now keeping track of the sole trader business that you've got and rental income. So yes, so if you've got many, many more things, you've just got to be aware of them all the time and make sure you've got all that information. So because for the rental property, you need the rental income and all the expenses. And you know what goes with that to see if it's a profit or a loss. The same with the sole trader. Is it a profit or a loss? Which all gets added to any other income you may have accumulated over that year. So
So
for a person that's very organized and is because I find a lot of people are so focused on their businesses, they don't want to have the extra hassle of this other, let's call it admin hassle. So as long as they know that there's someone that's going to make sure that the provisionals are submitted on time and the right questions are done. And obviously, I then say to them, and the way SARS operates at the moment, if I do it, I then have people on my e-filing profile, which is one big library with everyone's tax numbers in it. I can just pull it up, do their provisional tax, and I can actually, because their banking details have also been registered with SARS. And as long as they haven't changed their banking details, it's quite easy. All I do is I say, right, you've earned X amount. That's what your provisional tax is. I load it and I date it. So I generally will date it for the last day, that last Friday of the month, if that's what it is, for the end of the month. And all they've got to do is go in and prove it. So I've literally done all the work for them, and then I nudge them to say, right, make sure you approve it, because you don't have to approve it on that date. The way things operate at the moment, if it's post-dated, you can approve it today for a date later on in the month and that type of thing. So as long as they remember to do that, or I'll still get clients to say, please, remind me, which I then do, because that's the way I operate at the moment. It's all admin orientated, and I make sure that everything gets done, because I'm as irritated as them if they forget and there's a 10% penalty. Because if you got to pay 50K to SARS, to me, 5,000 Rand is a waste of money to have to pay it, and you can't get away with it. It has to be paid.
sure,
Okay, so
yeah.
you can do it yourselves, but you've just got to be very admin organized and orientated and know what you're doing to get it right.
Yeah, and one of the questions I'm going to ask you in a moment is also about what happens if you don't do it, or if you do it wrong, or if you submit something that you think is right and then it turns out to be wrong. So we're going to dive into that. More questions about what you can claim and what you can't claim, and more, actually quite a few more questions on what to do as a sole trader. And I just want to take a quick break and just say the first half of this discussion has been super insightful. And these tax questions that come up all the time from our audience, and they are so crucial. And because of that, I've decided to share the first half of this interview for free with you if you're watching this, even though we typically reserve this kind of content for our premium MSACA members only. So if you're finding this content helpful, and you want the full interview and loads more, then consider joining the premium community. But as a special note, if you do want personalized help with your taxes, then Rod, our tax expert here, is available to help. Now, his consulting services, they are not free. But if you want a fantastic resource who can help you on a professional level with your tax questions and with your tax submissions and making sure you don't get penalties, then his contact details are here on the screen. But for now, we're going to dive back into the rest of the interview for our premium members only. So, Dad, what are the risks of doing it wrong, not submitting, or missing the